On today's episode of the Leadmore Podcast, we sit down with Kristofer Kracht, the mental performance coach at the South Dakota State University athletic program. This is such a fun conversation. I love the topic of mindset. And we talked with Chris about how your thoughts drive your emotions and how your emotions drive your performance. And we use the analogy certainly of athletics, but how applicable it is to business and to life and to all other aspects. We broke down some really useful tools with your mindset that you can apply to your day-to-day life as a leader. While Chris has been at SDSU, the SDSU football team, of course, has won back-to-back national championships. And Chris isn't by any means taking the credit for that, but he said, all the things, we were about 95% of the way there, just couldn't get over the hump. And a lot of things had to happen to get that 5%. And certainly mindset might be one of them. And, now the challenge is, how do you stay at the top after getting to the mountaintop, winning 2 back-to-back championships? How do you avoid ego? How do you still put in the day-to-day work? How do you stay focused on your goals? And so all of this stuff applies to leadership in the business context, in your personal life. And I just wanted to sit down selfishly for my own self with Chris and learn some of those tactics. So that's what you're going to hear today on the Leadmore Podcast. You're going to love this conversation with Kristofer Kracht. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Leadmore Podcast. I'm super excited today. We got Kristofer Kracht here, the mental performance and strength coach. Is that the right order, Chris?
Yeah, mental strength coach, mental skills coach, mental performance coach.
Okay.
They really all mean the same thing.
All right. At South Dakota State University, that means not just football, it means soccer. I think almost all the sports. You work with like all the coaches and teams now, right?
Yeah, in the time that I've been here, I've had the pleasure of working with most teams. I would say football and soccer are most deeply into mental skills training.
Okay, cool. And we were just talking a little bit before we clicked record. I want you to tell the story because I love this story. It's very entrepreneurial. It's very leadership. You basically created the job that you wanted by I always think when you ask somebody for something, a big, bold question, the worst thing they can say is no. And you essentially created a role for that didn't exist to what it's become now. So tell us that story of when this started at SDSU during COVID.
Yeah, during COVID, my wife and I, made the decision that we wanted to get closer to family, not knowing where that would take us, but somewhere in between North Dakota and Iowa, between Valley City and Des Moines. And Brookings is home to me. I am a jackrabbit, and we ended up in Brookings. My wife is the one who actually got the job here first. And I just remember a distinct conversation I had with her one day as we were driving, I think, back from the grocery store, and we kept driving by the indoor facility called the SJAC. And I just kept saying to her, man, I wonder what it's like to work in there. And she said, why don't you just contact them? And I said, yeah, but what if they say no? Then what am I going to do? And then she looked at me and she said, well, what are you going to do if they say yes?
Yeah.
And I was like, that is everything I teach. Why am I not myself? And so I contacted the administration and said, I've got this idea. I would like to bring mental performance to SDSU. I'll do it for free for a while. Would there anybody that would be interested in doing it? The administration said, yeah, great. It was COVID. We could maybe do something on Zoom. We'll give you 30 minutes with all the head coaches. Then eventually it turned into 30 minutes with every coach. So that's every head coach, every assistant coach. And then on the day that I was to make the presentation, it went from 30 minutes. Chris, we've only got 5 minutes in today's meeting to make your sales pitch. And so I made my sales pitch for why I thought mental performance could help elevate performance, how it could help coaches coach better, how it could help athletes be happier. And we know that a happier athlete is more well-being, is also is a higher performer.
Yeah.
And from there, a few coaches bid on the idea, one of them probably being Coach Stig, which was obviously most prominent for me just because of his years of experience and how respected he is within the state of South Dakota. And it gave me an opportunity to work with SDSU football. And so in November, I just started year 5 with our football program and had the pleasure of working with several other programs here at SDSU, but primarily with SDSU football and SDSU soccer.
Well, I love that story because I feel like it embodies a lot of, I imagine, what you teach, right? Which is sort of like visualizing what this could be, breaking it down, starting small, and of course, as your wife said, what's the worst thing, right? Like, what
And
if
I
you
was
say
on the verge
yes?
of buying season tickets to like football and the basketball because I was like, that's why I moved here. It's going to be awesome. I can go to all these games. I had one of my best friends from graduate school lives here. He's actually a college administrator. We were going to go together. He's like, awesome. I've got a tailgating partner. This is going to be fantastic. And I just kept driving by the stadium and the S-Jack, and I really did. I was like, what's it like? I've been in the stadium once in my life at that point, when the new stadium. I'd never been in the S-Jack, and I just kept thinking, what's this like to work there? What would it be like to work in Division I football? Primarily at that point, because since I was probably 10 years old, I've been in love with college football. On the first day of the season, I'd always say to my mom, Merry Christmas. Because to me, it was Christmas morning. I got to open this present that is college football. There's no preseason games. We don't know what teams are going to be like. And I loved every moment of it. And so I just kept thinking, what's it going to be like? And I'll be honest, the whole reason I have this degree in applied sports psychology is thanks to my wife. The whole reason I'm really get to work with teams here is also thanks to my wife, because she asked me, what if they say yes? Then what are you going to do?
Yeah. And now you're on the sidelines of each game, right? Like now you're there.
Well, I'm very fortunate, very blessed.
Well, you led me into my next question, which is, I think some people maybe perceive, and I even asked you because Coach Stig is, love him, past guest of the show, a little more old school. Some people probably look at this stuff as a little woo-woo. And obviously, like, there's a lot of psychology behind this. You have your degree in this. Talk about your background that led you to this role.
Yeah, so my original background, I loved athletics, played sports all through high school. My body was not one that was really built for football. So as badly as I wanted to be an offensive lineman, I was about 6'1", 145 pounds when I graduated high school, but I had the ideal body to be a runner.
Yep.
So I decided that maybe I should invest maybe where God's gifts kind of led me, which is in running. I turned down a track and cross country opportunity in college to actually join the speech and debate program in college. I was fortunate enough to be a state champion in high school, and so did a little bit of background in that. That led me to be actually a college professor in communication and actually be a head speech and debate coach in college. And was fortunate enough to coach a team as high as I think we got 6th place in the country, in the nation. That's amongst all schools. So like we were up there with Alabama and Nebraska and Arizona State, you name it. But that's when I really began to apply all of these applied sports psychology concepts, because I had all these students in public speaking that were terrified and could not deal with their anxiety. They knew what to say. They'd outlined it. They'd practiced it in their room. They did it very, very well because they had to record it. But as soon as we put them in this live setting and there seemed to be something at stake, right? Like a grade, I might be judged. What if I fail? There's some outcome in place. Everything changed for them. And so I started slowly incorporating some of these concepts just based upon my reading. And I got really intrigued by it to the point where other people were asking me to talk about it. But I thought, I'm not competent enough to really be talking about this. I've just read a bunch of stuff. And that's when my wife said, you need to go back to school because this is clearly an area of passion for you. And so mental performance or applied sports psychology is specifically what my degree is in. It really blends my love of sports with my love of teaching and coaching. And so what do I do every day? I teach, whether that's in the classroom. Now I'm doing it on the sideline, on the practice field, in the weight room, wherever it may take me. It's really no different. Coaching is teaching. And so it really blends everything that I sort of enjoy together into one.
I love that. Yeah, coaching definitely is teaching. I 100% agree. So tell me a little bit about when we talk about, I imagine, like you said, even just a conversation in the weight room, what is the format in which your coaching or teaching takes place? Because it can be a formal presentation, and I'm sure it can be a pep talk, right? Like, how do you think about delivering your teaching?
It's really interesting, right? And you talked about Coach Stig being old school. I mean, when I first got involved with football, we're talking about a masculine sport, right? And B, we're talking about men. And as soon as you say the word mental, all guys,
emotions, feelings.
Like, what is this? I come to this dimly lit room. I've got this nice sofa, right? I spill my guts out to you, and then you tell me how I can do all these things. And it's nothing like that. And so my day is really unique, which is like here this afternoon, I've got a one-on-one session here with an athlete that we'll do in a what you would think a normal little office space is. And, we'll talk about what seems to be going on in this person's life, but we also do a lot of hallway psychology, which is A guy will grab me outside the weight room, right? Maybe it's outside the batting cage if it's baseball or softball, literally on the sideline during a football practice. We do team sessions, right? So we do full team sessions, both with football and soccer here at SDSU, where I'm in front of the entire team. And take the football team, I'm probably in front of the entire team about 35 times in a given year.
Okay.
Where I address the entire team, and that could be in a formal setting like you would think in our team space. It could be after practice right there on the field, as an example. And then sometimes it literally is at halftime. I can think back to when we played NDSU, our starting right tackle. I think he had 4 or 5 full starts in the first half, and we had a frank conversation in the locker room. But that guy is someone that I'd built a relationship with, right? And so he trusted me. And then at coming out of halftime, we talked again on the sideline, and my wife said, "You looked really mad at him. What were you saying to him?" And it was demanding, but it was not demeaning. And that's because we'd built that relationship. And so whether it is one-on-one, small groups, like by position group, or maybe the freshmen as a class, let's say, or whether it's the team, really applied sports psychology takes me into all kinds of different environments, that's way different than when you think of like clinical psychology.
Yeah, sure.
And how that operates. It's just a much different context and atmosphere that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, cool. I'm excited to dive in here because I know for me, when I think about like the concept of like limiting beliefs, right? I think of maybe it was just growing up in a cul-de-sac in Brookings, South Dakota, and this when I hired my own coach and read some business books and leadership books, it made me realize that we do put these ceilings on ourselves of what's possible. And one of the things I like to coach with my entrepreneurs is, your business will only be as big or as great as you allow it to be, as you want it to be, and you desire it to be, right? Like we often think it's the market or our customers or our prices or our products, and it's usually us. So I know you have a framework you're going to take us through, and you said it'll apply to sports, but it'll apply to personal life, to business. So this is about how thoughts drive performance.
Yeah.
So let's get into it.
Well, I think what we have to understand is we hear this word mindset. We hear it a lot, and really, what is that? And at the base level, mindsets are first created by thoughts, and specifically repeated patterns of thinking. And so our brain has neuroplasticity, which means we can change its shape and form based upon our thought life. And so when I say repeated patterns, those repeated thoughts could be ones that drive high performance, but they also could be thoughts that limit high performance, right? And so I remember a conversation I had with my dad a couple of years ago. My dad's probably the smartest person that I know. But my dad does not have a college degree, never went to college.
Okay.
And when he was in high school, somebody told him, I don't know if it was a teacher or a counselor, that he was not smart enough to go to college. So what did my dad believe? And he kept repeating that, which developed a mindset. And our brain is like any other muscle. Like the more we use it, the stronger it gets. So the more I repeat that pattern of thinking, the stronger it's going to be. And so I think what we have to understand is that are we even aware of that, right? And what I mean by that is our thoughts start this chain reaction. And it starts with, if I think that this sales presentation is going to go really poorly today, like this is not going to go well, now that unleashes emotions in my body. Those could be fear, it could be doubt, It could be anxiety. And typically we are aware of the emotion first. But if we just backtrack and think, okay, what's the thought that led to that emotion?
Yeah.
Okay. So thoughts drive emotions. Those emotions then impact my physiology. So things like my heart rate, my breathing, my muscle tension, and how my body feels will really then drive performance. But at the top, it started with my thoughts. And so if we can think about our thoughts and think, okay, is this thought serving me? Is it true? Is it effective? Does it help me? Is it kind to me? Then we can unleash these emotions of confidence, and my body can feel relaxed and powerful and loose. So then my performance is one that's in the upper range of my ability, so that I can perform more consistently in that upper range, especially when it matters, right? So I've got this sales presentation. This really matters. Yeah. And it might be difficult because that the people that you're presenting to maybe aren't on board with this idea. So to me, when we need mental performance isn't really when things are going well. It's really when things get difficult. And especially when things get difficult, and especially when they matter most, that's when we got to be most aware of our thoughts, because our thoughts really shape how we see the world, right? I had a mental performance coach use the example of Instagram. Our thoughts are like an Instagram filter. And so the picture's not going to change, but how we frame it or how we view it can. So if I use this black and white filter, that really changes the picture. If I change how I view this moment, that also is going to change the picture. But our thoughts really change how we view the world, which then impacts our beliefs. It impacts our attitudes, which impacts our identities, which then really impacts how we show up in the moment. And do we show up the way that we intend to, the way that we want to, the way that we want things to go? But a lot of that is driven by, how am I viewing the thought or the moment? How am I viewing myself? What sort of lens or filter am I looking through based on my thought life?
So do you think, I think sports is such a good microcosm of real life, because we get to do it over and over and often a repeatable sort of environment. So when you hear someone that they got ice in their veins, right? Or they're clutch, like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, do you think it starts with thoughts for guys like that?
100%. I was listening to a different podcast and somebody asked, if you could have dinner with 5 people dead or alive, who would it be? And this person mentioned Kobe. I was like 100%. I wouldn't say that I was a Kobe fan when he was playing. I was not a Lakers fan. I'm not really even an NBA fan. I grew up with Jordan. So I think Jordan is the greatest of all time. And we get in that debate daily here in the football program. It's kind of fun. All these young kids think LeBron. I'm like, yep. Missing it. But Kobe Bryant is a guy that I've spent a lot of time studying. And 100%, he spent a great deal of time on his thought life and working with the same person who worked with Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls. That guy followed Phil Jackson by the last name of Mumford. He followed Los Angeles. And so they worked a lot. There are a lot of breathing techniques, a lot of how do I be present in the moment. Kobe talked a lot about how do I deal with emotion, right? And how it affected him. And so 100%, they're just, not only are they wired differently, only 1% of the world can really be elite at anything. But at the same time, they spent a lot of time ensuring that not only their basketball skills were kept up to par, but our mental skills are no different, right? And we've got to continually maintain and practice those skills if we want them to be at the same level as our craft is.
Yeah, and do you think, I'm sure you've seen this from a bunch of young men and women, 18, 19 years old, coming to campus, just like the muscle analogy with our brains. Is it often taught, or do some people just have those thoughts, just kind of, they're born to really control their thoughts, and even someone like Kobe, was it mainly taught and grown?
Yeah, I think our environment certainly matters, right? Like someone asked my daughter, one of her friends, like, Eva, why do you have such a great mindset? And she's like, well, you've been in my house. Like, you've heard my dad talk and the things I can and can't say.
Yeah.
So I do think environment plays a role in that. But the way I sort of explain it even to athletes is like sports psychology is really the weight room for the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And clinical psychology is kind of like the training room for the brain. Right. And all of our athletes here go to the training room on a daily basis, even if it's just to get their ankles taped.
Sure.
But they go there often, right, to rehab. I got a sore shoulder, right? My neck kind of hurts. And they think nothing of it. Well, maybe you need to go to the weight room for the brain on occasion too, because you're lacking some confidence. You're not really sure how to deal with pressure. And so the mindset that maybe served them at 15, 16, 17 years of age probably doesn't work anymore. Like, they've gotten stronger. They've gotten better technically at their craft. They know the game much better, but their mindset is still stuck in 15, 16-year-old. It's not going to serve them now in college, in collegiate athletics, where things are faster. They're more intense. The competition is harder. That mindset certainly isn't going to serve them. And so I think that what we have to really understand is that Kobe and Jordan, they have negative thoughts. We all do. Research tells us that we have about 60,000 negative thoughts a day.
Jeez.
So take that in the context of like football. That's 15,000 thoughts we're going to have in football in a game. 12,000 will be negative.
Wild.
Now, I can't control the first thought that comes into my mind. I really can't. We're not in control of that. But I can control what I do with that thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I say, it's really the second thought that we are in most control of. And so
good.
High performers, 100%. I mean, I thought this morning, even said to my wife, I said, I'm kind of wound up about this podcast. Like, I listened to some of your podcasts. He's got these authors and people doing all these big things. And I'm like, why does he want to talk to me? I'm just trying to help some athletes here. And so I started thinking about, well, what if I get on this podcast and I can't make sense and I don't have clarity? Yeah, I had those thoughts.
Sure.
But prior to getting on here, I did some deep breathing. I told myself I'm going to kill it. And I guess that's for you.
Here we are. We're killing it. Yeah.
Eventually, but I have those thoughts too.
Yep.
It's just that I try to help not only myself, but also all the athletes and organizations that I work with. What do we do with those thoughts? And so some of it's environment, but a lot of it is, do I choose? I don't know if I believe in mental toughness as much as I believe in either you're trained or you're untrained. And we know that mental performance, it's a skill. There's a science that backs it. And we know that it can be trained and it can be taught and it can be learned and it can be applied. And we know that it enhances performance if I choose to invest in that type of training, just like I choose to invest in bicep curls.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Same concept. Great. This is good, Chris. So we start with our thoughts. Where do we go from there on your model here?
Yeah. So thoughts are going to drive emotions.
Yep.
Right. And what I said is that most of us will recognize the emotion first. So we can feel that, hey, I'm angry right now.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm really anxious. But we need to take a step back and say, okay, well, what is the thought that's driving that? Because that emotion is going to affect the physiology, my body. Right.
Yeah,
so now my heart
sweaty
rate's
palms
really, and my heart rate's really elevating. Right. I got sweaty palms. My legs are shaking, and now I'm stepping into this boardroom, and I've got verbal diarrhea coming out of my mouth because my body's so tense. Everything's happening so fast that I entirely forget what I was going to say that's up there on the slide. Like, what does that image even represent? And because my body feels that way, that's what ultimately drives my performance. But it started with a thought. So ultimately, thoughts drive emotions. Emotions impact our physiology or how our body feels. Right. And how our body feels then drives our performance. But if we can have the right thought, literally in the moment of execution, right? So just before I step up there in the boardroom, and I'm not saying that before it doesn't matter, it does. But literally when I step up there, what am I thinking? Right. And is that going to drive then confidence, which makes my body feel relaxed and calm and in control? Yeah. And now I let my training take over because I've spent hours training this performance. I know what to do. Now I just have to do it.
So let's use that example. So thoughts drive emotions, then the emotions affect the physiology. So like the gentleman, the right tackle with the offsides or the false starts.
Yeah.
He's probably down. His thoughts are spiraling. His emotions have already gotten the best of him.
Yep.
Do we have to back up to the thought to kind of reset?
Yeah. So for him, what we did is we call it shrinking our thinking. Okay. What are 2 to 3 keys for him to be successful? You can think of them like cues or cue words. And for him, that might have been tight hands, tight elbows, stay low, right? Okay. That's all he was thinking before every play, right? And so when he thought that kept him in the present moment, which allowed him to be in control of his breathing, right? Which then allowed his body to be one that's relaxed because he was so tense. As soon as the Fargo Dome crowd got crazy, right? And they even put the number of false starts up on the big screen. Like he saw this number in large print, right?
Yeah, they were in his head.
Yeah, they were in his head, right? And it kept him in the present moment. So he wasn't no longer thinking about the past. He was only finding the information that mattered. The crowd noise didn't matter. What's on the video board didn't matter. What mattered was the play call. We're going on to tight hands, tight elbows, stay low, right? And now he feels like he's in control. He feels relaxed. And now he can perform because he can stop this guy. Like, there was proof of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's how we go back to do it is 100%. We have to go back and think about what's the thought that's really led to this emotion that I'm feeling, which is anxious, fearful, doubt, anger, happiness. Like, it can be positive emotions too, obviously.
Would that be your answer to, like, I consider myself fairly mentally tough. Like I definitely have a growth mindset. But I tend to get stuck in the woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? Looking back at the past, be like, man, I see it so clearly now. I totally messed that up.
Yep.
And I understand that I can't change that, but I
Yep.
still want to like replay that in my head. And I'm guessing athletes do this all the time.
100%. Yep.
What's your advice there?
I always think that after a performance, right? So again, you could have this sales talk in a boardroom, right? It could be an athlete. It could be even a conversation with your spouse or as a parent. I think like Major League Baseball players will call this showering well, which is once they shower and once they put on like their civilian clothes and they leave the clubhouse, the game is over. I'm not going to think about it anymore, right? I've taken time to reflect on it. And so I think we have to have an endpoint to when the meeting truly ended for us, right? And maybe that's when you get in your car. Maybe that's when you pull into your driveway at home. Sometimes I will take a moment or two when I get home to like sort of take a deep breath and then I just leave it in the car, right? Because it's going to still be waiting for me tomorrow when I get back in the car, but I'm not taking it in the house with me, right? And so Tiger Woods had like 10 feet. When he's on the golf course, he'd walk 10 feet and then that swing was over, never to be thought of really probably ever, right? He was on to the next shot. But I also think how we choose to evaluate our performance matters. And so a concept that we use within our program is what we call, and with soccer as well, we call what went well. And so we try to identify what are 3 things I did well today, right? They could be, minor things. We're not looking for major, right? I had a really good throw on that crossing route. Might be the only good throw you had all day, but that's one we're gonna note. The second part is what can I improve upon, right? What are 2 things I need to get better at? And then the last thing is what did I learn about myself today? And I think what that does is it's an objective way to really evaluate our performance. It takes the emotion out of it, and so now we're critiquing the performance and not the performer.
Yeah, I like that. The action,
yeah. And so I think, it's really, like I said, it's about when does the game end for me? When does the meeting end for me? When am I no longer, when do I change from being a mental performance coach to then becoming a husband and a dad?
Yeah. We did way back during COVID, I did an episode with someone on the topic of remote work. And that was one of the things so many of us, if you're a work at home person, struggled with because now there wasn't the physical barrier. So she said, even leaving the bedroom or leaving the office to go to the bedroom, or she had this wind down routine to separate work and life. Yeah. Same idea. Okay. So if any Jacks fans are listening to this podcast, and they'll know that, especially in the football program, there literally was like this slow and steady mountain climb to the top. It was like, hey, we've made the playoffs. Hey, we got to the second round. We won we won the division. We won the conference. And each step, it seemed like, man, we had to pay our dues. I'm going to say we. I know my wife, she used to be a sports journalist. She hates the we bomb, but I never played for the Jacks.
I get it.
But I've been a fan since I was 2 years old. So like there literally was like a step by step, and like we never got to skip a step, it seemed. We get to the national championship and then we lose in a heartbreaking fashion. But now we've won back-to-back national championships. Talk me through what are you saying to a locker room like that is at the top and even kind of stayed at the top recently?
Yeah, one of the big goals of last offseason, so defending a national champion, was I thought it required a different mindset when you're on top versus sort of chasing. And I think those are 2 different mindsets to me. And so, we came up with about 8 different things last year that I really tried to hammer home every week that I thought required a different mindset. And so like one of the ones that I thought was most salient was we have to be willing to fail. I don't believe this team ever worried about failure. I don't think they ever worried about what if this is the game that we lose, because they were willing to fail. And we talked openly about what if we lose a game? What are people going to write about us? What are the fans going to say about us? What are people like you going to say about us, right? Like, what are we going to do if that should happen? And I think that was meeting one with the team in the fall. And I think some of our older guys were shocked that I was like going to talk about, well, what if we lose, right? Like that's what kind of mindset is that? And part of that stemmed from, I don't know, maybe some of your listeners, like Swamp Kings was a big documentary series on Netflix that sort of went behind the scenes with the Florida Gators and Urban Meyer. And
yes, I did see that one. Yep.
Yeah, the Tim Tebow time when he was there. But one of the things they talked so much about was they were always worried about what if this is the game that we lose, right? And they said
that crippling, didn't they talk about it?
It was very crippling, right? And I'll be honest, I think some people would be shocked to hear this, but I never really felt our team felt any pressure last year because they were so willing to fail. At the same time, we talked a lot about we're going to embrace these expectations, right? So now we are on top and everyone's saying how great we are and that we should do this and we should have this and these guys should get drafted and be like, okay, then let's just embrace everything that comes with it, right? Let's embrace every media session, what it's going to be like on the road, all the attention we're going to get, the sold out crowds at home, the big opponents that we get. We're just going to embrace every moment in this. But most importantly, we're going to really enjoy this process. And I would tell you that our team enjoyed every moment of this last season, right? Every practice, every team dinner, every weight room session. And that doesn't mean every day they were motivated.
Sure.
I'm not suggesting that. I go back even 2 years ago, that practice that Friday night before Montana State, the game that was so cold, might have been one of my favorite practices here. It was snowing. It was cold. Our guys were like little kids on the playground. We knew it was terrible out here, and we're like, this is awesome. We are playing in December at home with a chance to go to the national championship. We're going to do things that most people don't want to do right now.
Yep.
Right? Like, this is what's going to separate us. So let's go out here and enjoy this last practice. We don't know if it's the last one, but we're going to enjoy it together. And I think that's, some of the things that we talked about in this offseason about how it's going to be different. Well, now we've got a different team with really a bunch of returning guys, but we lost a lot of different guys too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a different set of challenges that we're about to enter this year. And so, we've spent some time talking about ego and trying to learn from like Blockbuster and their failures and how they could basically be the Netflix of today.
Yep.
We spent time talking about Kodak and how Kodak didn't innovate, and now no one really hears of Kodak anymore. How they
those guys probably don't even know what it is.
Right. That's what I had to give a brief history to our team. Like, what is this? Right. And so, whether it's pulling on examples from history, examples from sports, examples from business, whatever I can use to reach our team that gets them to understand what it is that we're about to tackle. And so we've spent some time really talking about it's Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy.
Yeah, great book.
How is the ego really going to prevent us from getting better? And so, we talked about the U.S. women's national soccer team was supposed to win the World Cup, right? Heavy favorite, win 3 in a row, if I remember right? And the rest of the world has caught up to them.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is they've not done much to innovate to
push ahead,
raise their game, right?
Yeah.
You're telling me right now the NDSUs of the world and the Illinois states and the Montana states and the Montana of the worlds aren't. We know they're
in the locker room talking about you guys. Yeah,
right. Like they're chasing us. We know that.
Yep.
But we're not. We're just really focused on becoming the best version of us, and it's never really been about anyone else. But we know we've got to continue to improve. Even though we've won 2 national titles, we've got to innovate. We got to. This season will require a better version of who we are.
I like that. Well, if anyone's listening, not a Jacks fan, I know Chris and I know this, but from August to January, they won every game. They never lost.
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if I sidetracked you. We talked about emotion or thoughts, go to emotions, go to physical. Anywhere we need to go from there? Do we cover all that?
Yeah, so from that physical standpoint, that's what drives how we show up in the moment. So our performance, right? Like, does that speech go the way that I planned it? Right? Does it, do I perform the way on the field just like I practiced on the practice field, right? But that it all starts at the top with thoughts. And I think one of the unique things I would say that we really do here is I don't think, especially in athletics, but I would say it's even true in business, things don't go according to plan, right? And so we never talk about being perfect. And so while we visualize our success, 100% we do that, we've also got to visualize what happens when things go poorly, right? So what happens when I miss that wide open wide receiver? What happens when I fumble? What happens when I miss the tackle? How do I respond in that moment? And so what happens in my presentation if the slides are out of order and I didn't realize it, right? What happens if someone stops me in the middle and asks me a question I didn't anticipate? What happens if I do forget what I'm going to say on this particular slide? How do I respond in that moment really determines whether or not I have a successful day or not.
And so you're not necessarily trying to avoid it by thinking about
Not
it.
at
You're
all.
more so just preparing for how you'll respond to
Yeah, so
the
we've got to plan for adversity in advance.
yeah.
Right? Like all of us want to be resilient in the moment, right?
Hmm.
So take our football team, we're down 10 to Montana State. We want to be resilient. But if we haven't trained it prior to that, it's too late.
Yeah, that's good. And so when do we then what's the healthy amount of leaving it behind, like we talked about earlier? And when do we do the replay, or like I'm sure you guys walk through, do
Yeah.
you diagnose or kind of debrief on mental toughness?
Yeah. So when I get back on Mondays, right? Probably the first, I don't know, 5 minutes of our talk on Mondays is sort of, in my perspective, debriefing the game. I kind of do my own what went well, what can we get better,
Yeah.
what can I learn about our team from a mental perspective.
Yeah, cool.
And then once I've done doing that, we're now flipping the page, to the next opponent.
Okay.
Same is true in the film room. Like we'll review the film on Monday. Each position group will, however long that takes. And again, we try to do it in an objective way, which is, hey, here's some things we did really well in this game, right? Here's some things we need to get better at. I think the nature in sport, particularly in a sport like football, where we film everything, it's always, what do we do wrong? Right.
Mhm.
One of the things I've really tried to stress to our coaches, we got to catch them doing it right.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we
And
ignore
reinforce that behavior, right?
100%. That doesn't mean we ignore what went wrong. That exists too, but so does the good stuff. And so too often, you could have a baseball hitter go 1 for 4 and hit the game-winning home run, but they'll say, but I struck out 3 times.
Sure.
And that counted. Don't get me wrong, but so does the home run. And so it's somehow, if you ask a player when they get off the field, what did you do wrong today?
Yeah.
If you ask them, what did you do well today? There's probably this long pause.
They have to think about
maybe this.
And that's probably a muscle too, right? Building that. And I'm sure there's a culture then of calling that out amongst teammates, like applauding each other and giving props.
Yep. So, on Monday we come back and do that. And then by, 6:00 or whatever, we're on to the next opponent. Never to really worry about that film again, unless we should somehow play that team again in the playoffs, as an example.
You mentioned visualization, and maybe as a Jacks fan, I kind of got goosebumps when you said it before we were recording. So, you come on board, old school coach, longtime success, had a lot of success without a strength and conditioning. But you asked him a question that he had never thought about. Tell me about that story.
Yeah. So when I met with Coach Stig in our initial meeting, after he'd heard my presentation and thought this might be something that could help the football team, he obviously wanted to meet. And one of the questions I asked him at the end of my conversation with him was, have you ever visualized winning the national championship? Do you know what that looks like? And I grew up in North Dakota. I've been alive for numerous NDSU national championships, whether as a kid, now as an adult. My best friend has season tickets to the Bison. You're inundated with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had really visualized, what would this look like for SDSU to win? I'd been there, man. I know what the confetti felt like. I kind of knew what the ring might look like. I knew what that feeling would be like. And so I asked Coach Stig if he'd ever done that. And he said, no, I haven't. And I said, until you can see it, I really don't believe we can achieve it. And so from there forth, we put together what I call the Champions Day, where I tried to take our team inside what it was like to win a championship. Whether that's even recalling if they'd won a state championship in high school, let's say, right? But through video, I put together this Champions Day, whether it's Tiger Woods or whether it was North Carolina winning the basketball tournament, right? Or whoever won the NHL Stanley Cup that year, the World Series, and just like put this montage together to get them to understand, what does this feel like? But then quickly changing the conversation to, okay, what is required of us to get this? That's where we need to lock in on. But part of it was really getting Coach Stig, the program, to understand we can do this. We can to believe it, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the depths, it said, this is possible for us. There is a brighter future. There is hope there. We can do this. And they'd come so close, and I want to be clear. Do I think mental performance has played a role? I would like to think so, but I'm also know that everything matters, whether that's strength and conditioning. We've got awesome players, right? Like some great athletes and guys that work extremely hard. We've got talented coaches, and we continue to bring in talented coaches. We've got a great fan base and administration. Like, all of that plays a part. And so everything matters. It's just a matter of being 95% good at everything. What's that last 5%? And it's a multitude of things.
Yep.
Maybe mental performance was one of those, part of that 5% that just kind of got us over the hump.
Yeah, no, I believe it. And I think that's, again, why I love the analogy of sports, because you got to see it to believe it. I think that if you're going to start a business, you got to visualize what it looks like. If you want to start a family, talk to, like, what does that look like? What are your values? What do you do on the weekends? Like this apply, if you want to lose 10 pounds, if you want to run a marathon, all these things, you got to see it to believe it.
I think the question I think that I remember asking is, what is your capacity for success? Right. And I told there's a story about two fishermen on the banks, and this one fisherman always looks over and says, "Why do you keep throwing back all these big fish?" And he said, "Well, my frying pan is only so big. I can only catch fish that are of a certain length. Otherwise it won't fit in my frying pan." And the guy said, "Well, why don't you get a larger frying pan?" Right. Like, this doesn't make sense. And so I sort of tried to relate that to, what is our capacity for success? Are we really just an 8-4 team? Right. Or 9-3 or 10 whatever our record was when I was 6-5, 6-6. I don't even remember. Right. Like, what are we? Right. Yeah. Is that our capacity? And that's really the question I asked. And then we really went to work on process driven things, understanding. You'd asked me, I think, at some point about motivation. Mm-hmm. I think there's this notion that these guys are always highly motivated. Not true. There's, it's 6 a.m. It's dark. It's cold. It's January 21st, and I got to lift weights, and it's 20 below. Do I think I'm motivated to do that? No, I'm probably not. But that's where discipline's got to kick in. And so just really understanding what motivates you intrinsically, and that will drive you during those tough times, because that's when championships are built, and really getting our guys to understand that at a fundamental level, and the why behind it, but then, like, how to do that and give them skills to do that is critical.
I love that frying pan story. I always say in business, you'll never make $1 more than you believe you deserve.
Right.
And so you have to believe that you deserve that big contract or that big client or account or whatever it might be. So, all right, Chris, I want to finish with, you've listened to the show before, so you might know this is coming. I imagine your brain is pretty sharp. Seems like your tongue is pretty good too. But tell me, what's your superpower? What's the thing you do best?
Well, I think what I do best is motivate. If that's a superpower, I think that I have an ability or an enjoyment to really dig deep into a human psyche and really understand what makes them tick to get them to go, whether that's individually or as a team. And each week, and at least in a football season and even a soccer season, that's something different. Mm-hmm. So how do you keep 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds motivated on task in this world of Instagram and Snapchat and this world of social media and where they could post a picture and everyone tells them how great they are, and they can get all this interaction and feed their ego. How do you really get them to stay locked in on what truly matters? And I think that the ability to do that is my superpower. If I have to have one, that's what I think I do best.
Cool.
On a day in, day out basis. And so, but part of that just comes from a love for what you get to do. And I'm so blessed and fortunate and grateful to be around student athletes on a daily basis and to be associated with great programs like I am. That makes that job enjoyable. I don't want to say easy, but it makes it
doesn't feel like work.
It doesn't feel like work. And so that comes out naturally because I'm just so grateful to be here. And to be surrounded by great people.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that they have you, and I know we could go another hour on this. We'll do a part 2 someday, but thanks so much for coming on the show, Chris.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the show and breaking that down. Such useful information. I was taking a lot of notes here while we were talking. I'm excited to see where not just the football team, but all of the programs at SDSU continue to go. And I'm going to use some of this in my leadership coaching as well. So, All right, remember, you can get all episodes of the Leadmore Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, but we are also now on YouTube, so you can watch this episode in video format. See Chris, see me. You can go to YouTube, search John T. Meyer, or search Leadmore Podcast. You'll find us there to subscribe. All right, that's it. As always, leaders, take care and be well.